Good afternoon. Please help us to remember that the family is.
Well, we can, yeah. I think there were some people doing it offline. If you are parked in the Seaside Garage, you will want to move your car over here because they will close the garage before we end this session. So again, if you're parked in Seaside Garage, go ahead and take this time to move your car. It's on the third. Yeah, it's where you think it is. Burke, nice to meet you. We're gonna wait for our car movers to. Always something, right? First world problems, as I like to say. Oh, well, I was gonna wait till a few people who were parking came back in and from using the bathroom. I was gonna wait until it hit 12:35. But
when it hits 12:35.
We got 26 seconds.
I'll be your friend until then.
I don't have any prepared remarks, but
That's fine.
Stephanie
Hughes. She's the Hughes. I'm the Preston.
son-in-law Stephanie is last name is Peacock Preston.
Peacock Preston?
Yeah, I keep
That's a
wanting to say
great name.
that.
Wow. He was born hyphenated?
Yes, he was born hyphenated, so I don't know if he's going by Lee Peacock Preston. I need to ask him what exactly if he hyphenates
When
three now.
When you
or-
get, yeah.
I don't know
two
where that
hyphenated
goes.
people marry each other.
Well, our son isn't hyphenated. He's just Lee. But I think maybe he's Lee Peacock or Peacock Lee.
He
Peacock
could
Lee,
be.
maybe.
Preston's a
He
great
dropped
name.
maybe
I
dropped
might
the
be
Preston.
related to your
Preston is
son-in-law.
I think it's his mother's side.
Wow, very
sure.
interesting. All right, get a hold of
Fabian's back.
and now other people are leaving. We'll just get started and just let people come in as they will.
All right. Burke. And free hug. If this works, let's maybe corral everything and begin, because I know Stephanie has 90 minutes or so for us. Just to let you know how we got to this point to some degree, there are a bunch in this room that attended the Reformation Project conference last fall, and then started meeting, partially Pastor Shelley's instigation, now John Hutchinson leading our group. Atchison, I'm sorry. And one of the early action items was to put on this kind of a training. It so happens that our lay leadership committee, one of their commissions is to train our leadership. And so that was, I guess, co-sponsoring of this event between our own lay leadership committee and the Reformation Project. Kind of perfect, and maybe this will not be the only one we have. So I want to introduce Stephanie, who this is Stephanie Preston Hughes. And Stephanie has been meeting with us, and we didn't realize until we kind of brought this up that Stephanie has been a trainer many times. For this, Stephanie's a licensed mental health counselor, has some affiliation, or has had affiliation with UCF, and in other places has done this kind of a training. So we've met to try to tailor it for our church. Anyway, we're so excited to have Stephanie lead us with this, and maybe more in the future. So welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you. Kim stole my thunder a little bit. That's quite okay. And I will, as a point of reference, I will be accompanied by members of the Reformation Project group from here within the First United Methodist Church, and we'll do some question and answer. So although I'm standing in front of you here talking, it is not the Stephanie Show by any stretch of the imagination. And so the hope is that this is a beginning of a dialogue and a beginning of a conversation and a way for you all to calibrate where you are as a faith community and where you might want to go. So one of the things when we get started doing this kind of work is we've got to figure out where we are. So that, I hope today, can be part of that. And what I was going to say is a little bit about how we got here and a little bit of story. So my name, as Kim said, is Stephanie Preston Hughes. I use she, her pronouns. By training, I am a licensed mental health counselor. And I was born and raised a devout Catholic in a very small Midwestern city, Akron, Ohio, if any of you know of that. Woohoo, we have Akronite? You're from Akron? Near, okay. Oh, wow, that's very small, yeah. Reynoldsburg, Ohio. Okay, so it's a lot of Midwesterners. And I was very active in terms of being raised in the Catholic faith. I was baptized, had First Communion, confirmation. I was a Eucharistic minister in high school. I was very active in my faith community. It was fundamental in terms of providing me with emotional support, social support growing up. And I heard some negative things about what it meant to be gay back in those days. I've known I was gay since I was 13 years old. I did not come out to family or friends until I was 20 years old and in college in 1993. And for anybody who remembers, 1993 was a fairly large March on Washington, which my college group attended. I was the president of said college group, so I thought perhaps it would be a good idea to tell my family, lest they see me. In those days, it was, we didn't have social media, so I made a trip home to come out to family and to tell friends. So fast forward to now, I am a practicing Quaker who is married to a lifelong Methodist. I will briefly point out Elizabeth, and then we'll leave her alone. She's sitting here. Elizabeth was raised in this church here at First United Methodist Church of Orlando, and she's currently serving as the lay leader for College Park United Methodist Church. And I came to the Reformation Project conference here that you hosted back in October, and it blew me away. It was an amazing conference, and I didn't know quite what to do with that. And then I bumped into Pastor Shelley at an interfaith dialogue that was held with part of Mayor Buddy Dyer's council at Lou Gardens. So she and I are driving around in the back of a golf cart, and it was one of those meant-to-be moments, and I basically invited myself, can I come and just join in your community? And she said yes, and so I'm good at getting myself invited places, as you might have figured out. And so I really have enjoyed being in conversation with folks who attended the Reformation Project conference. And so there was a lot of dialogue about what do we do with what's going on in the Methodist Church, where do we go from here, who are we, what does this mean for us? And so one of the things that we were clear about was that we can always learn more, and for those of us who know things, we can always review what we know. So that's how we got to where we are today. And the other part is that I'm free, and you're a church, and so that works. Yay! A couple of ethical disclaimers. I am a licensed mental health professional. That does not mean that me talking to you today is therapy. I hope that you feel good by the end of this, but it is not therapy, and I will not charge you my hourly rate. And also, there's no conflict of interest in me standing here and presenting to you, because I'm not being compensated in any way. So the purpose of this is really pretty simple. So we just want to do some very basic conversation in terms of increasing our knowledge about LGBTQ population. And we want to foster some relationship building. I can already see just by being here with you all that that's a strength of your church, right? I may be preaching to the proverbial choir here today, and I think that's okay. And I do want to acknowledge that, but that's a great starting point. And you can figure out where you would like to go from here. And then ultimately, strengthen our faith community. How are you going to get stronger? How are you going to carry the message of God's love from this place? So what this is not, I am not really well trained in scripture, y'all. So we won't go there. There's great resources. I know Fabian is really involved. You have the other sheep. You have the new class that's here. There's excellent resources, and I encourage you to look at those. I think there's excellent materials out there. you have any questions, please see members of the church here who can share that information with you. This is also not a theological debate. I'm not really great at trying to convince people to believe things. I think I'm a little bit better at convincing hearts and just encouraging people to have open minds, so that will be much more my approach. And last but not least, I have no predictions about the future of the Methodist Church. I'm aware that the decision that was made from General Conference happened in the end of February, and that also the decision regarding the Judicial Council was released just within a few days ago. So I know that's hanging over, and I just want to name that. And so that might inform some of the dialogues that you have at your small tables here today. So here's our little overview, what I like to call our gay agenda. And if you can see, very cleverly, on Tuesday you'll notice tacos, Taco Tuesday. Because gays and straights alike do like to go to Tijuana Flats for Taco Tuesdays, right? Okay. So we can find something that we can agree on. Excellent. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about cultural humility. By popular request, we're going to review some key terminology. Some of these words that we're going to be talking about get really conflated and confused. I trip on them sometimes. Gender expression, gender identity, sex assigned at birth. So we're going to talk about all those things, and I'm going to give you a fantastic handout that's got a great website resource for you to go visit that has more downloadable resources. So we'll spend a lot of time on that. We're going to talk about facts versus myths, stereotyping essentially. We'll look at about intersecting identities. What does intersectionality mean? We will do some question and answer time about what it means to be LGBTQ, and specifically what it means to be an LGBTQ Christian. And then I'll introduce you to one Quaker concept called queries. And I recognize the irony of the word queer. In queries, I assure you that the first Quaker, George Fox, back in 1600s, had this concept made up well before I'm standing in front of you. So it's a for real thing. So one of the ways I like to start our time when we're talking about sensitive issues of identity, of diversity, is talking about shared agreements. And this is basically, it's coming in with a mindset. I don't like the word rules. That feels really rigid. We're mature people. This is just more kind of getting you kind of spiritually, cognitively on the same page. So just respect what is said, right? And so if someone's saying something, but that's because that's true for them. And we're just going to believe that someone's speaking their truth. We're going to honor the privacy of stories that are shared. So you might hear something in here that's really moving, and maybe someone's really okay with you retelling that story. But before you do, just check with the person whose story that is to make sure they're okay with you relaying that. And that's pretty common sense. This is, I think, the biggest one. I want you to notice and sit with any discomfort that you're feeling. Discomfort about, gosh, I realized I may have said some things that were hurtful in the past, and now that I'm in this space and realizing some better ways, I'm feeling maybe ashamed. Or you might experience some guilt about recognizing how a majority group that you're a part of has perpetuated harms. But just notice that. That's okay. My goal is not to make you feel comfortable. The goal here is get you to expand your awareness and to learn something. And then speak from your own experience using I statements. So if I can say something like, I'm confused about what you said, can you clarify that? That's a little bit different than people blah, 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 right? So speak from first person, speak from me. Ask questions rather than assume. And this one is something that we spent some time talking about earlier this week, intent versus impact. So I want to assume, and I encourage you all to assume, that the folks that you're having conversation with today are coming from a place of good intent. We're here because we're trying to learn, we're trying to build community, we're trying to understand. Now, that being said, can it be true that I come from a place of good intention and that I hurt somebody else? Sure. My example is the yellow light, yellow traffic light, right? It's a yellow light and I zoom through it. I didn't mean to hit somebody or rear end somebody in front of me, but if I did, I hurt them, right? So I just need to really be careful. So to me, the intent versus impact is just that yellow light, just be conscious. Are there any others that you would like to suggest or that make sense, or any questions about this kind of idea of shared agreements? Good, we can all do a thumbs up. Excellent. So, at your tables, you have some note cards, and we are going to conclude our time here today with you hearing from the experts. And the experts are LGBTQ identified individuals within First United Methodist and or within the Reformation Project who have been brave enough to volunteer themselves to share their experiences with you. So I invite you to, as we're talking, write down a question. Now is a time that if there's something you always wanted to know, you can do it anonymously, so there's no embarrassment factor for you, okay? What do you want to know about being an LGBTQ person? What do you want to know about being an LGBTQ Christian? So, anybody heard of the terms cultural competence and cultural humility? Okay. So I've worked in higher education for a long time. I was at UCF for a number of years before going into private practice, and I've worked at Rollins College, and this idea used to be, when we were doing diversity education work, that the goal was learn as much as you can about somebody else and about their culture. And while that's a noble cause and not necessarily bad, it can trip us up, right? Why? Is it ever really possible to know everything about somebody else's culture? So the thinking has shifted a great deal in education and doing work in social justice, that now the goal is more about cultural humility. And so we're shifting from learn and know as much as you can about other people to listen. Less talking, more compassion, and just accepting what other people's experiences are. So it's dangerous to think that I can understand the lived experience of another person, right? Makes sense. So what I'd like you to do is, once I stop talking, I'm going to, within your tables, I want you to think of an aspect of yourself that's personal to you, that's important to you, that other people at the table don't already know about you. Okay? And in 30 seconds, I want the first person to begin sharing, and I'll kind of monitor, and every person at the table needs to go. Ready? Go. Are you beginning to wrap up? Are you at your last person? Wonderful. One of my therapist gifts is that I can pay attention and listen to you when you don't know that I'm listening to you. It's a great skill. Okay, so let's take just a second. We're not going to necessarily have an opportunity for everybody to debrief, but why spend a few minutes doing this get to know you activity? So that's a question for you to answer. So why do this? Helps to start a relationship, connect. Yeah. Yes, Burke. Wonderful. I'll have to come sometime. Right, and so, Chris? Absolutely. And, woo. Quakers, when we clap, because we worship in silence, and so this is Quaker clapping. And I realize that I look silly when I go into other faith spaces and I do this. I'm actually not hearing impaired, and that's also how, clapping and hearing impaired community. I think it's a wonderful way. Yes. Wonderful. The other piece of this that I think is helpful, although it's just a small slice of an example, is to be put on the spot and told, okay, you need to think of something really personal, and I'm going to tell you to share it right now. You get to think about it, go, right? So what is that like? Maybe similar in some tiny way to coming out. So LGBTQ individuals may face this decision about whether or not to come out in all kinds of spaces, all day, every day, to the checkout person at the Publix cash register, to at church, to whatever. So just hold that in your awareness, whatever was going on in your mind and your body as you were thinking about things like, how do I decide what to share? I'll let somebody else go first so I can calibrate what I'm sharing based on what they disclosed, right? How deep do I want to go? Melanie, did you have something you wanted to say? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Right. So one of the things that you can carry, thank you, Melanie, for that we can carry with us is that coming out is a process, it's not an event, right? So most LGBTQ people will tell you about their coming out story, which is sort of like usually the first people I came out to, friends and family, but it's always going on all the time, right? So hold that in your awareness. So thank you for doing that and getting warmed up. We're going to transition into doing some terminology. The vocab sheets and the genderbread sheets, do we have those? Okay. John is going to hand something out to you that is a useful tool. This is for you to take home. I'd like to start with some of the basics. My assumption is that all of you sitting in this room have heard of the terms that you're seeing in front of you right now. LGBTQ+, right? So L, lesbian, a woman who is attracted to other women, gay, a man who is attracted to other men, or a woman who is attracted to other women, Bisexual, someone who is attracted to both men and women. Transgender, someone whose sex assigned at birth is not congruent with their gender identity. We'll go over this multiple times. Queer questioning. How does that word sit with some of you all when you see that cue? It's a difficult one, right? And then the plus. So if you ask 10 different people, they will tell you that LGBTQ means lots of different things and that the plus means this, and if we add every word that could fit outside of this, we could have an acronym that's so long we need an acronym for the acronym. And so what's been commonly accepted now is to use the term LGBTQ+. So plus might include things like intersex, it might include two-spirit, it might include pansexual. So I want you to think of that plus as everything that could fall outside that gender norm. Are we okay with this particular slide here? And we know that the rainbow flag, I'm assuming that folks know the rainbow flag, right? So let's go to the next one. We'll spend more time here. So one of my favorite teaching tools is this genderbread person that you have in front of you. There's a great website called itsmetrosexual.com. If you're a teacher, if you're working with groups, they have wonderful downloadable PDF handouts, and also just for your own self to do some more education. And it talks about some of these terms, right? So this is some of the stuff we usually get confused. So if I fill out a form and it says to me gender, what are my options usually on paperwork? It says male or female. And every time I see that, I'm like, no, but I don't have access to give this workshop to the person in the tech room who's doing the paperwork. Sex assigned at birth is what the doctor said when you were born, usually based on looking at genitals, right? And so that's male or female. So when we say male, female, that's sex assigned at birth. When we say gender identity, that is who I know myself to be, who you know yourself to be internally up here. So when you look at your genderbread person, you see the brain on there. That's the gender identity, man, woman, or something in between, right? Cisgender. So this was a really new word for me, even just 3 or 4 years ago, really commonly used in the community. So people whose sex assigned at birth, right? So if I was assigned female at birth, matches my gender identity, which is a woman. So I am cisgender. Sexual orientation. Who am I attracted to, or to whom do I experience attraction? And gender expression is, what is it that I show to the outside world? How do I communicate to you in this room my gender? And then intersex, what did we used to call intersex? Hermaphrodite, right. So that term, I want you to delete that from your vocabulary. Considered very medical and not necessarily very sensitive, but intersex refers to people who were born with perhaps both genitalia or chromosomes that are not necessarily XX or XY. And so that can be a broad range of sex. Are any of these new to anybody? Have you seen these in writing, heard these terms before? The intersex? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know, one of the things that was interesting to me, there's a great movie that is free that you can watch on YouTube, and it's called Intersection, Intersexion, and it's a story of 5 to 10 different individuals and their experience of being intersex people. And it's more common statistically than you might realize. In the medical research, we know that something like 1 in 20 people do not fit normal sex assigned at birth. So there's a lot of people out there from who sorting is not necessarily an easy thing. So I love these visuals because it has this picture of an umbrella. So if you can conceptualize thinking of LGBTQ identity as an umbrella terms. So for part of the majority, or what is assumed to be standard sexual orientation or gender identity, those are the ones on the top of the umbrella. So cisgender is the assumption. So if I go out into the world, people will make an assumption, default, that I am cisgender, right? And if I go out there into the world, I don't know, maybe not so much anymore, but most people, the default is that you are heterosexual, unless you tell somebody otherwise, right? And so these terms on the bottom or under the umbrella are just examples of a few terms that fall under LGBTQ. So I'm not sure how well you can see some of this. Are there any there that are new to you? Are you willing to raise your hand and ask? So I have pansexual, there's a question, and demisexual. Yeah, so anybody else, anybody know what demisexual is and want to take a stab at it? Ryan, go for it. Yes, I don't know if everybody heard what Ryan said. You nailed it, Ryan. So a person who experiences romantic or affectional attraction before they experience sexual attraction. So I'm not necessarily interested in you sexually until I know how I feel about you. So essentially it's saying the feelings have to come first. So I think that's a very lovely and useful term, actually. And the other one that was a question is pansexual. And somebody else want to take a try at pansexual? Fabian? Yes. Yeah. So fellow lovers of language and Greek and Latin roots know some of these key prefixes and suffixes, right? So the word pan means all. So pan, sexual, like panoply, you can go through all the pan words that you know. So pansexual meaning attracted to all. So if I say I'm bisexual, what that's saying is I'm attracted to both men and women. Someone who says I identify as pansexual, their perception or their understanding might be that I don't necessarily recognize that there are only two genders, or it may also mean that I'm attracted to another person regardless of what they identify their gender to be, right? So there's some really interesting conversations that can be had around this. So for example, and we'll talk about this when we get into intersectionality, if I'm married to an opposite sex spouse, right? So if I am a cisgender woman, I marry a heterosexual man, and my husband comes out as being transgender and transitions, and now presents in gender expression as a woman, feminine. What does that make me, the person who is still in the marriage, with that person if we decide to continue our marriage? So this gets pretty complicated if we make the decision to continue our relationship. I don't know, I can't answer that, that's not my experience, but many people that I know of will adopt the word pansexual to describe their orientation. So things like demisexual, homosexual, heterosexual, pansexual fall on sexual orientation. To whom do I experience attraction? Does that make sense? I see a couple of confused faces. Melanie? Yeah. So not mutually exclusive. I don't know if you heard what Melanie said, right? So identifying as one doesn't mean I can't identify as the other. So I saw Chris and I saw Fabian. David, I'm sorry. I don't know why I want to call you Chris. We'll hold that. Yeah. Right. So we understand, and I'm going to go forward a couple here. And if you see your genderbread person, you'll see arrows, or you'll see a line with an arrow at either end. So one of the important things that we can take away is what Fabian just said. It's the idea of all of these things being on a continuum, right? And so if I were to look at sexual orientation, to whom I experience attraction, pansexual would be on perhaps one end of that sexual orientation. I can experience attraction to anybody. And asexual, I don't experience sexual attraction, might anchor the other end of that, right? Does that make sense? Make a little sense? And to answer your question about when did this happen, I don't know, but I woke up one day and I'm 46 years old. I came out in the early 90s, and it was pretty much gay, lesbian, and some bisexual, and that was it. And I always was perceived to be on the really extreme edge of things in college and in early adulthood, and I found myself working in higher education. I'll wait till the... Yes, yes, I do that. And then working in higher education with young folks, and I began to learn all these terms I would guess starting in around 2010, but, put a date on when the revolution began. I don't know that I can do that, but John, you had your hand up. Did you want to offer something? Yes. And this is where it gets, so remember when I talked about cultural humility? So right now, we all have smoke coming out of our ears. I can see it. I don't know if you can see it. I'm looking at you and you're going, and that's okay. So there can be sexual attraction or sexual orientation or affectionate attraction, right? So I may not necessarily be sexually attracted to somebody, but I can experience affection. So some individuals might know an asexual person and say, that's really sad they don't experience sexual attraction. I'm here to tell you that the asexual friends that I have are like, it's not sad at all, it's great. I can still hold hands, I love to hug people, I have very deep and meaningful friendships. I can even have relationships, but the sexual intimacy is not the most important part. Mm-hmm. So my short answer, and I would encourage you to continue in dialogue as a community, my short answer is to not overcomplicate it. Use the term LGBTQ+, and as you're in your company, in your groups, in the classroom, working with others, you all have to, as whatever community you're in, come to some understanding about the language you're going to use when you're interfacing with people. But my experience has been, and I would invite people to say otherwise about, I think that most LGBTQ people find the LGBTQ+ to be inclusive. John, I see you nodding, other folks nodding. Anybody have a different thought on that? Yeah. Don't get too hung up. That can be, and I think what I've heard some people say, Fabian, is that when we use the word sex or sexual orientation, it can feed into some of that stereotype of that this is about sex when it's not. And so I think the feedback I've received is that LGBTQ kind of takes away from that, but yeah, so what we're doing is we're saying no more binary, and it's almost taking something from two-dimensional into three-dimensional, and it's a huge paradigm shift. I will share with you that as someone who's worked with college students, with young people, we are way behind on this. So if you were to go into some spaces with our millennial brilliant young minds and Generation Z, they're introducing themselves already using, "Hi, my name is so-and-so, I'm panromantic, and these are my pronouns." And you're like, whoop. And everybody over 40 is going, when did this happen? So I invite you to just kind of let your mind be blown. I am going to move on, just for the sake, but again, I just want you to notice where your questions are, where your discomfort is, and notice that one of the things we try and do is intellectually understand something, right? You noticing that, like you're scratching your head, but these things are really personal and very emotional for some people, and spiritual, as we'll see too. I do want to spend a second on this. So the transgender umbrella. So transgender can be used as an umbrella term. One of the common misperceptions about this word is that transsexual equals transgender, right? And that's not true. We know that not to be correct now. Transsexual is a word that's a little bit more historical, which would define somebody who made a medical transition for from their sex assigned at birth to be a gender other than what they were born as. Someone can be transgender and never have undergone any kind of medical transition, and they are just as much as transgender as someone who maybe identifies as transsexual. If you see the word two-spirit there, that's something that's really an indigenous term that many people know about. So if you look historically at Native American cultures, indigenous cultures from every continent really had some form of gender that was a third or fourth or fifth. And there's beautiful terms for each of these. So I encourage you to learn a little bit more about that. It's not necessarily saying that someone who says they're two-spirit is gay. So it literally means for them, two spirits in one body. So I could have the spirit of a male person and the spirit of a female person in this one container. Isn't that a cool concept? Right. Yeah. Performer, drag queen, drag king, oftentimes someone who's gay or lesbian, but not necessarily. Non-binary, so if you look at your gender-bred person, and we see gender identity, right? Who I know myself to be, man, woman. What am I if I'm right in the middle of that? Gender non-binary, so that's my gender identity. I don't identify as either or. So you might say I'm neither gender, or you also might say I'm both genders, right? Gender non-conforming, that one has more to do, in my understanding, with gender expression. So this depends on time and culture, right? So, and place. So if we look to early colonial America and our guys who wore the white wigs and the right, so there's some context around that. Now, if Kim were wearing that around church today, he might look a little funny, but in 1775, that was accepted. So we've got to, when people say to you, that's very masculine or feminine, I want you to immediately anchor yourself in the context of time and place and think about that, What are some places now, if I go in the Catholic Church and see the long, talk about transgressing gender. Some of the outfits that we wear and some things like that are very much outside what I think are the gender norm today. Any questions about anything that's on here? Okay. So you've got your genderbread person that you can do some more work with. A word about pronouns. You all noticed that I introduced myself using she, her, and some of you do this at your tables? Yeah. So the reason that this is a thing that you might want to consider doing in your community here is it's proactively stating that we are not going to make an assumption about the gender identity of anybody who's in this space, right? So whether or not it matters to you, it might matter to someone else. So when we all identify our preferred pronouns, it says we're not going to make any assumptions. How about if you don't know? Ask. So let's take a few minutes. I've been talking too much, and I'd like you to have some conversation at your table. And also remember, if you have a question that's coming up, please do write it on a note card, because I know you have some questions. Yes, give me a second. So, well, I'm a pretty direct person, if you haven't figured that out. So I would just say something like, I'm sorry, I didn't get what your preferred pronouns are. I'm Stephanie, I use she, her. And, people who identify outside the binary or who are gender non-conforming really usually feel very moved or extremely pleased to be able to answer that for somebody, I have not yet met a trans person who would be offended if someone said, I'm sorry, I didn't catch what your preferred pronouns were. It's great to say it just like that. They actually, see this little graphic on the side, if you go to Office Depot or some of these office supply stores, you know how they have the, hi, my name is, name tags, they sell these now with preferred pronouns. Yeah, for real. It's a thing. I'm telling you, corporate America is realizing they can make money off of this. We have lots of money. Yes, so Kim asked what is Z, Z-E, or X-E-Z. So I will share, I have permission to share about this individual who's an acquaintance of mine, goes by the name Danny, D-A-N-N-I, happens to be their birth name. Their pronouns are Z, Z-E, so it would be Z and Zir, right? Danny is intersex, was born with ambiguous sex characteristics, has experienced medical issues unrelated to that. And when you see Danny, you say to yourself immediately, this isn't clear to me whether Danny is man or woman, masculine, feminine. And so for them, having a pronoun that isn't clearly one or the other is the most true to who Z is, right? That's a pretty unusual one. I only know one person who uses the pronoun ZE, and I've been doing this work for a decent amount of time. They would be most often, I've experienced, if people are on the, identify as gender non-binary or non-conforming, they's pretty typically used. Yeah. I've also heard that pronounced Z, but just spelled with an X. Mm-hmm. I've not ever met a person who used that pronoun. So I guess you're going to have a lot of them left in your pack if you buy one of these at Office Depot. But again, I just want to kind of shift the culture here. If you're in a young group or you're going on campus to Rollins or Valencia or UCF, they're doing this. We are on the caboose end of this, people. Like, they're using pronouns. So let's take a minute to talk about stereotypes, and I'm aware of my time is flying really fast here. Give me a second. Let me make a decision here about this. Well, let me get a sense from you. One of the things I'd like to show is about intersectionality, and then also a short humorous video. Or we can do some work at your table on stereotyping. What is your sense of what you'd like to do? You want to do video and intersectionality? Okay, great. I think we've maybe all experienced enough of the hurtful stereotyping that we can understand that we're carrying those experiences. Okay, thank you. So we don't exist in a vacuum, right? I mean, I certainly don't. I don't think any of you do. So it's really important as you're navigating the world and you're talking about LGBTQ people in your church, you're not seeing them as just LGBTQ. You're asking yourself, what other aspects of this person exist that impact who they are and ways that I might serve them, or what their spiritual needs are as a person. I love this little image here. It shows the complexity of ourselves, of our identities, right? So all these things that can be part of you, your sexual orientation, your language, your ability, your gender identity, your age, your marital status. So you get the sense of how complex we are. There's a great writer. She's really prolific. Her name is Kimberly Crenshaw Williams. And back in 1989, so 30 years ago, she coined this term, intersectionality. And she basically said, look, we can't just, and this all came about because of a lawsuit where a black woman was discriminated against, and they said, no, you didn't experience sex discrimination, and no, you didn't experience racial discrimination, but the heart of the lawsuit was, I experienced discrimination because of the way these things came together. So it gets really complex. And so she's saying there's overlapping experiences of hurt, of discrimination, of difficulty, and how we navigate the world based on these things. So one example might be, what if I'm disabled and also poor? How does that affect my ability to access resources that I need to navigate the world, right? What if I am Latinx and black, and I'm going in spaces where there are a lot of other Latinx people who are predominantly lighter skinned than me? What if I am transgender and married? How does that impact my coming out process, my transition process? So there's complexity in this. There's so many nuances, which is why one size does not fit all. So if I asked you to think of aspects of yourself that seemingly contradict with one another, I'm sure each of you could come up with something, right? Like, this group that I belong to expects me to be this way, and this other group I belong to expects me to be this way, and I'm neither, and sometimes they can butt up against each other. So when I was talking with some of the folks from Reformation Project, I said, what are some common experiences of LGBTQ Christians? And this is a list that we discussed and came up with together. So I want you to really look at this. I'm just going to read this out loud and just take this in. Hearing that all are welcome, but not being allowed to fully participate. Uncertainty about whether people will accept me when I first attend church. Difficulty trusting others at church due to past spiritual trauma. Not seeing people like me represented in leadership. Feeling judged by other Christians for being LGBTQ, and feeling judged by LGBTQ people for being Christian. That's a thing, if you didn't know that. Right, queer people? Okay, I want you to look around and see that, right? What I've heard from my gay friends who are non-theist is, why bother? They hate us. Doesn't that make you sad? And then being told my identity is an issue, right? It doesn't feel good to be an issue. I've not ever enjoyed being someone's issue. So these are just a few. What I'd like to do is, do we have any questions? Or if we have questions, are we comfortable just asking them of the people who are going to be on our panel without being anonymous? Okay, all right. So we have 4 folks in the room. We've got about 30 minutes left, and my sense is that you all are ready to really talk with each other and have some conversation, right? So the people who've agreed to be panelists, would you go ahead and come up now? And so because we're talking about complicated things and we're just getting started, I wanted to add a little lightness to this, right? This can be intense, this can be heavy, and that's okay. It's a serious thing. And so I discovered this video. What if we talked to straight couples the ridiculous way that we talked to gay couples? So enjoy. Go ahead, Cheyenne.
Hey, I'm glad you guys found each other, but could you not do that in public?
So, who's the mom and who's the dad?
What?
Hi. Are you guys worried he's gonna come out straight?
You know, I don't really tell many people this, but I actually had a straight phase during college.
Hi, guys.
Hey.
Good to see you. So a couple of things. My abuelita is a little old-fashioned, so if you guys could just not hold hands and pretend to be friends,
Oh.
Oh, okay.
that would be great.
You guys know Kim and Tom, right?
No.
Oh my God, they're the other straight couple in our group.
They do a lot of the same stuff as you.
There you go.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I just want to let you guys know you guys are so brave. I'm really cool with this.
By the way, we're hanging out with Jake and Kim's night. Oh, the straight couple. Fun. Yeah, I know, right?
Well, I didn't know Billy had a mom and a dad.
Did I ever tell you how cute I think you guys are? Will you be my straight best friends? I could be your straighty matey.
Don't they know it's Adam and Steve, not Adam and Eve?
Heteros.
So how do you know that you're straight if you've never had gay sex? How do you guys have sex?
We,
Yeah. I was going to make a comment, but I'll leave that alone. My guess is if we were to poll everybody up here, you all have been asked lots of absurd questions or perhaps been subjected to some of those stereotypes. All right, we'll sit with this part first, and I have 1:37 right now, and so let's take about, I think we've got time to do about 15 minutes. of doing some question and answer here. Are there any kind of guidelines or ground rules that any of you all here want to say that are different than what we've discussed earlier? All right. So, do we have questions written down? I didn't see a lot of writing, which is why I said let's just, okay. All right. So why don't we, as you're thinking of some questions, and if you don't think of them, you have one there, okay. So can you all introduce yourself, your pronouns, and anything else that you would like to say?
Well, my name is Ryan Arnold, and my pronouns are he, him, and his.
Anything else you want to say, Ryan? You're usually not that brief. And you know I love you.
Not really.
Okay.
Hey y'all, I'm John Atchison. I don't have preferred pronouns. You're welcome to use whichever pronoun you would like to. And I go to church here. I'm also a seminary student in Berkeley, California.
Hi, I'm Shelley. My pronouns are she and hers. I do not attend church here. I attend at a UCC church in Longwood. I'm here with my wife, Yvonne. And yeah.
My name is Fabian Lazarte. I prefer the pronouns he and him, although I don't get offended if they change the pronouns, because since English is my second language, I always have problems with pronouns, so I change everybody's pronouns. You know, whether you are straight or gay, I will change your pronouns. I attend this church and have my partner Jose with me. Yeah, 2 years.
Wonderful. So I'll let you hand the microphone. Do we have any questions out there in the audience? You have a question, Brooke? Or something you want to say? Question?
No, he wants me to say, he wrote it down, that he knows trans men. The Reformation Project was here. Yes.
Yes. Here at First United Methodist, the Reformation Project has learned about all of this. Let me maybe get things started by asking, what does it mean to you, each of you, to identify as Christian and LGBTQ?
I always say that I didn't choose to be gay, but I chose to be a Christian. That was a decision that I made. So in a way, I think, I can say that I'm proud of being gay because that's what God made me. But I'm not proud in the sense that I work really hard to be gay. So it's not like I achieved this, and I'm proud to have achieved being gay. No, but it was very hard to be a Christian. I have to work my will and to face, first of all, in a way kind of a little bit of rejection because I'm the first Christian in my family. My whole family is Catholic, and then coming out as gay, then face the rejection of the church, and still keep my faith because I chose this, because my faith is important to me, and at first it's essential to me. It is my identity now, but this is a chosen identity.
So for me, I didn't become a Christian until I was in college, but I didn't come out until I was, I don't remember how old I was, in my 20s. After college, after I'd moved here to Florida, which was a little over 10 years ago. So all of that kind of happened in a very odd way, but I won't go into any of that. So what it really means for me is I almost feel like a lot of gay Christians have had an opportunity to really stop and think about what faith means to them and who God is and what God is about, because we have to. We have to know, because a lot of times we have to defend it to other people. we've had an opportunity to break apart maybe some of the rules and the things that people have just told you. Like, this is true, this is true, this is true. So so I feel lucky that I've had that I've been forced, because not everybody really stops and takes the time to really deconstruct and then reconstruct their faith. So sometimes I feel like we're lucky that we have that opportunity, even though it is forced upon us, I will say. But it is something that I feel like LGBT Christians are a lot more informed in their faith and really understand and can feel that love in a way that I think some people may not have had the opportunity to do so, because it wasn't forced on them. So that's what it means to me.
So the church is kind of where I first experienced community, and I was really happy with my church family until I came out and I was told I was no longer welcome. So I think that experience taught me that my sexuality and my faith are both two integral parts of my identity. And I think these days, what that means for me is, as someone who's created in the image of God, how my identities work together to reflect God to the world have to work together.
I mean, I could echo parts of what everyone here has said. For me, I grew up in Mississippi in fundamentalism. So much like John, I experienced my first community in the church, and my grandfather was a deacon growing up. My dad was a deacon when I was growing up. So just a lot of my identity came from in the church. And like Fabian said, I didn't choose to be gay, but I chose to be a Christian. And everything that I've read, everything that I've learned about being gay and also being a Christian is there's a lot of struggle there. And so I think the most strengthening part of it for me is knowing that it's a struggle. And I think that being Christian and being gay has taught me that despite the struggle, I'll be okay. And that's the main thing I take from it. I feel that my answer to that question might be different from a lot of people's, because having disability, you get a lot of people wondering about you from, I was born with my disability, so from the time that I was 2 years old, I can remember thinking that I was different and people would look at me. But for me, I work with children, so I would prefer someone just ask a question and not worry about offending me. Like people with their kids, I see parents telling their kid, no, don't ask that, don't say that question because it might offend him. I'm not gonna get offended. I would prefer you to ask, because if you wanna ask a question, to me it means that you wanna learn. And so if I'm answering your question, I'm educating you, and you're not going to offend me by your question. So
I actually would echo that. So you were not alone in that, Ryan. I think that when I come into a new space, I am so afraid of having to come out again. I'm so all of the trauma that I've experienced comes back, and I have to walk really cautiously forward as I determine what I can share. Is it a safe space to do that? And so I feel like having someone willing to ask the questions makes me feel more comfortable sharing, because it means that you're already thinking about who I am and how I can fit in here.
And I want to reiterate that as well. I prefer to be asked questions. However, I do want to speak from the other side, because you're looking at people that are willing to get up here and talk about their experiences and their life. But I will tell you, most of the people that I know are not willing to have these kind of conversations unless they have a relationship. So the types of questions that you might have and how those questions are asked is very dependent on the relationship you have with the person. It is not incumbent on the LGBTQ plus population to educate other people about their existence. And a lot of times it does feel that way, that everywhere we go we have to, well, let me explain myself to you, let me explain myself, and that can be very tiring. So that is not, I want to make sure that that's not an expectation from people, because we wouldn't expect a black person to walk in the room and let me tell you about my experience so that we can get along better and so we can relate. We wouldn't expect that. That's silly. That's kind of similar. So when you have a relationship with someone, that you're friends, you're getting to know them, it's the type of questions that we ask people is very dependent on the type of relationship that you have. So that's what I would say. So if it's a very personal question and you want to know someone well enough to ask that type of question, great. Be in relationship with that person. You might get it answered without having to come out and ask. I'm sorry?
Thank you for the clarification.
Yes. Did you want to say something? Or to add?
Did we answer your question? Because I didn't know if you because even us as a LGBT, like me as a gay man, it took me a while to understand transgenderism. It was something that I did not understand, because we have nothing in common. Probably the rejection that we might face, but I don't think it's even the same level, because a transgender person being something so physical, visible, probably experience even more rejection, because I can walk in the street and people might assume or not that I'm gay or not, but a transgender is more visible, so they have a different experience than I do. So it was hard for me. So I also have to struggle to what should I say to a transgender person, how should I ask? And I've learned through being in the LGBT community and meeting other transgender people that in general, they will prefer to be asked, what is your preferred pronouns? Or how do you identify? And but like Shelly was saying, it's always when there's a relationship, and also I think people can feel your intent. Your question because you really want to be educated, or you are questioning because their existence bothers you.
I'm not familiar with a color code. I might need to become familiar, it sounds like. Well, I'm wondering, was it just a solid color, or is it like a flag, like stripes? Okay, so then, that's what I had a feeling. So there is a ton of flags. The rainbow flag kind of encompasses, everybody. But then different identities have different flags. You can Google it. I've Googled it before because I've been at Pride and I'm like, that one's unfamiliar, and I will look it up. So if you Google Pride flags, or you'll find several websites that have pictures of the different flags for the different identities. Right, wikis all over that. So yes, if that answers your question, I'm not familiar with all of them myself. I'm learning. I'm learning. I didn't know what demisexual was either. I think people it's funny because everyone assumes, oh, you're LGBT, you must know all the things. Like, nope, I know all of this. That's it. So anyway, if that answers your question.
So I love the curiosity I hear. there's going to be a bunch of people Googling when you get home tonight, which is great. And also, as you seek to learn more, do remember the cultural humility piece, which is rather than try to know everything I can, I'm going to listen to what you share with me about what that means for you, right? So, for me, that's a feeling of relief. When I heard the term cultural humility, I was immediately like, oh, thank God, because it felt like less pressure and it invited curiosity rather than what I perceived to be a bit of arrogance, which is that I could ever actually know it all, you know?
And I just want to say, I don't know your daughters, but I know my relationship with my mom. I'm more likely to get offended if she doesn't know something I think she should. The rest of the people on campus would have probably been okay to hear you ask a question.
Yeah, please.
Well, actually, that's exactly what won me on this church. Because before I arrived to this church, I went to other churches where I thought it was like overly celebrated, that I was like, oh, we have a gay member, yeah, rainbows. Chief. I was like, well, I was like, yeah, so like I'm the gay talking guy in this church. Like that make me feel uncomfortable. It's like I don't want you to like me because I'm gay. I want you to embrace me because I am a Christian, because I have something to offer for the body of Christ, not because of my sexuality, because what God gave me. And one of the things that won me really to this church was like, I always tell the story that when they never asked my sexuality, they say, what are your talents? So I used to sing in the other church, and they say, okay, well, we'll introduce you to the worship leader. At that time was Chris Greener. And I said, so Chris, I used to be part of the worship team. And he said, oh, great, just come on Thursday and we're gonna rehearse everything. And I guess like almost a PTSD from the rejection of others' church. I said, well, but I have to tell you something. And he said, what? I said, I'm gay. And he was like, but can you sing? And I was like, yeah, like this is my church, because they didn't care. Like, what, can you sing? That I'm confused, I like that they didn't. My sexuality was not an issue, whether positive or negative. It was a non-issue, and that was important to me. I don't want to be in a church for my sexuality. It's like my sexuality is an issue, whether it's a positive issue or a negative. It was just a non-issue. We are here because you have something to give to the body of Christ. So that's the reason I'm here. Yeah.
Lucky you. Yeah. So, yeah. So, you could say you're a safe place all day long, every one of you, but that we've heard that. We've heard all are welcome. I know, that's what I'm getting there. So when you say those things, we don't necessarily mean it. It's built through trust. So whenever you are introducing yourself to a new person, and they say, I'll just say, take my wife and I, for example. When I go to a new place, when I say, this is my wife, I watch faces. That's how do I determine if this is a safe place? I'm gonna watch you. And see how you react to that. So, so just be, if you really are welcoming, your face isn't gonna change at all. You're gonna completely like, oh, okay. If, you know, what I really like is when people are like, oh, how long have you been together? When is your anniversary? Really taking, asking questions that tells me you value my relationships and who I am as much as you do all of the other people there as well. So at my church, I shared this at the Reformation Project worship night, that my pastor will acknowledge anniversaries, and we're acknowledged in front of the entire congregation. Oh, you know, it's, you know, Shelley and Yvonne's, you know, whatever anniversary. Or when we were fostering, they treated us as parents just like everybody else. They didn't ask, oh, well, is it really hard for you because, you know, just, and just treating people like people. And when they say things like, oh, this is my partner, not reacting in a negative way, really, and celebrating along with them their celebrations. Because one of the best things for relationships in the church, and heterosexual people know this, one of the best things you can have with your relationship is people cheering you on. So if you know that the church is behind you and cheering you on and celebrating those goods and talking to you when things are not going great or whatever, that really strengthens you. So the best thing you can do is just be you and not react in a control your face. If you are still struggling with it and it's uncomfortable for you, try to control your face, and just try to keep being there so that we can learn to trust, I think is probably the best way to do that.
So I'm gonna hit the pause button. So John, why don't you finish and then we'll come to a closure. I'm very aware about how woefully inadequate our time is. So I will leave this up to you as a faith community about where we go next from here. But thank you for that brave question. And I think that's a really key question for the whole church to answer.
I think that all of us up here are happy to continue this conversation with you if you have more questions. I would just like to echo what Shelley said about visual cues, not just in your faces, but in the building itself. I know that we have the rainbow flag on the door. I'm so thankful that now we have the newspaper article posted where people can see it as soon as they walk in the building. I think that we need to be mindful of who might be excluded still. I think it's important to recognize that we don't have a gender non-conforming restroom on property anywhere. And so if a transgender person were to come in and not feel comfortable in the men's room or the women's room, where do they go? So how do we respond to that before it happens? I think that there are other things that we can do in addition to that to just make sure if we do have a visitor come here, they know that they're welcome before they even speak to someone.
Thank you for that. So the questions that are bubbling in you, I want you to note in yourself, write down. If you're feeling a call to action, I want you to get a sense of what that is. I would say that's a good thing. And so you're going to have to do some work together to kind of say what's next for us as First United Methodist Church of Orlando. And I know that's happening in a bigger context of the whole United. I get that. I think you might want to aim to be the church that other people benchmark against. You know, that could be a brave new thing. So let me introduce you to a query, Q-U-E-R-Y. So a query is a Quaker discipline, a practice of asking oneself and asking ourselves as a community questions that have more than one right answer. And the purpose is not necessarily just to come up with the answer. The purpose is to deeply reflect on how our actions, our behavior as a church, as an individual, can align better with what God would have us do, okay? So I invite you, I'm gonna
time us. Are we okay with doing 3 minutes, 4 minutes of silence? Can I invite you all to sit in that with me? Okay. So there's some I queries and there's some we queries. I will read these out loud one time, and then we'll just go into some quiet, and then when the time is done, Quaker thing that we do is shake hands and say, "Thank you, friend." And that'll just conclude our time together for now, but please do stay after and mingle and keep talking, okay? I queries. How can I love more like Jesus? Do I trust God, the Holy Spirit? Am I willing to join together with different people in deep faith community? We queries. What might we do to move beyond welcoming and tolerance? How will we affirm to LGBTQ people that they matter to God and to our church? Congratulations, you're all Quakers now. Isn't that lovely? Can you imagine what things would be like in our places of work, and if we all started a meeting with a minute of quiet and ended every meeting with a minute of quiet? Thank you very much, friends, and thank you to the people who were brave enough to answer questions for us. Thank you, friends.